What is going on, guys? It's Jack Gillis 1875 here, and today I'm going to be bringing you the rather sorry tale of BSG Motor Suhl, the DDR Oberliga's worst ever team. Now, we hear all too often about SV Tasmania Berlin, the Bundesliga's worst ever team, but today I thought I'd hop over the Iron Curtain and cover the DDR Oberliga's worst ever team, because this story is even worse than Tasmania's in many ways. In this video, I'll be going over that doomed 1984-85 season, some of the factors as to why Motor Suhl did so badly in the Oberliga, and a little bit of background to Suhl the city and Motor Suhl the team. I really hope you enjoy this video, guys. It's a tale of an amateur side that were in a league that was far too big for them, but bravely struggled their way to the bottom of the eternal DDR Oberliga table and gained themselves the unwanted title of being the worst East German club side ever. So I really hope you enjoy it. It's going to be a great video and this is going to be a great story. Let's jump right into it. So if you look at a map of the DDR, the Bezirk Suhl, which Suhl was the capital of, the district of Suhl, was tucked away in the southwestern corner of the DDR, near the state border with West Germany, southern West Germany. And this is a major factor as to why Motor Suhl did so badly in the Oberliga. Suhl was a regional backwater. The Bezirk Suhl, which is now a part of southern Thuringia in modern day United Germany, is a very remote and mountainous region, and Suhl is the only major city for miles. As such, being a regional outpost, they were never going to be massively successful, as nobody really paid any attention to that part of the country. Now, as I discussed in my DDR Oberliga guide, which you can watch for reference if you want to find out a bit more, being a regional backwater in terms of anything in East Germany, but football especially, wasn't going to work in your favour at all, because the government don't care, the party don't care. As such, you're not going to do well financially, or your football team's not going to do well. So Suhl's remote location, tucked away at the bottom of East Germany, away from anywhere, is a massive factor as to why they didn't do well at all in the Oberliga. And this section of the video is going to cover Suhl as a city and Suhl as a factor itself and why their team did so badly in the Oberliga. So as was previously discussed when I was showing you where Suhl was in East Germany, Suhl is a pretty unimportant city. It's sort of in the middle of nowhere. It's out the way. The nearest cities to Suhl are Erfurt and Gera, and they're still a pretty decent whack away. It's a very remote part of Germany, and it's sort of a forgotten part of Germany. Now, during the East German times, Suhl wasn't an important place and didn't really have anything of interest to the party, which in East Germany meant you were going to get largely ignored and you were going to get underfunded and nothing was going to work properly. Now, in the 60s, they built the fancy stuff that you can see on some of the pictures, like the community hub, that sort of round building, similar to Dom Kulturas in the Soviet Union, which is sort of a community hub for the city, and some of the new flats. But apart from that, Suhl was mostly made up of its old medieval buildings, because it wasn't really a bombing target in the war, so a lot of its old medieval buildings remain intact. And all that Suhl's really famous for, and especially in East German times, are three things: the Waffen Museum, the Weapons Museum, the Krupp Weapons Factory, where the East German variant of the AK-47 was made, and its sort of smallish motorbike factory. That was all Suhl had. Now, cities like Dresden or Leipzig or Brandenburg were far more important because they actually made stuff the East German government cared about. They made a few weapons. Okay, East Germany get most of their weapons from the Soviet Union. They make a few motorbikes. Okay, there's bigger motorbike factories in other parts of the country. So really, Suhl was just unimportant and was out of the way. The other thing was, it's quite a backwards part of Germany. Up in the mountains, up in the Harz Mountains, nobody there really was sort of on board with the East German government, which is another factor. So basically, Suhl itself, when we look at the story of Motor Suhl, is a massive factor because it was out of the way, it was in the middle of nowhere, and it was something that the party leadership in East Berlin, I think if you probably asked a lot of them, if you probably asked Honecker, he'd say, where the hell is that? You know, it was a place that was forgotten about by the East German government, and as such, the football team was always going to struggle. Now, like I said, you can look back at my guide to DDR Oberliga football. If you are a team in a part of the country the party don't care about, you're never going to do well. If you look at teams that did well in East Germany, they always came from big cities or cities that had some form of importance to the party, like Jena, Dresden, East Berlin, Magdeburg, Rostock, those sorts of places. A city like Seoul, they never stood a chance because simply nobody in the party cared. Seoul was just a quiet little city. It was its own district capital for some unknown reason. There was many attempts to absorb it into either the Bezirk Gera or the Bezirk Erfurt to sort of just get rid of it. But, apart from that, Seoul was just a quiet district capital of one of East Germany's smaller districts that nobody cared about and was largely left to get on with its own business. So there's a sort of the story of Seoul and why it was a factor in why Motor Suhl didn't do so well. I'm now going to move on to talk a bit about Motor Suhl and how they were organised as a club, and that is also a big factor as well. I'm now going to talk about how Seoul was structured as a club and a bit of background to the club themselves, because this is important to the story. It's an important factor in why they did so badly. So first of all, Seoul belonged to SV Motor, Sportverein Motor. Now, as I discussed in my DDR Oberliga guide, again, you can check that for reference if you want to remind yourself of any of this stuff. Motor were teams for factories. Now, it was just factories in general, but usually factories that made parts for things, as suggested by the cog on the badge. Now, of course, Seoul had the VEB Waffenfabrik Seoul and the VEB Radfabrik Seoul. So, the motorbike factory and the weapon factory. These are both small factories. And as a result, the club weren't going to get much funding at all, because that's how it worked. Now, usually the sports club would share players and delegate players out, but if you belong to the motor sports club, you'd rather go to a big city or a major one. So you want to go to Weimar, maybe Motor Weimar, who were a relatively successful DDR Liga side, or Altenburg, where you'd have a better chance to develop as a player and then maybe angle at one of the bigger sports clubs like Dynamo, for example. So that's why Motor Suhl were the smallest, I think, and most remote out of the motor clubs. So they were never going to attract many players. So there's one major factor already, plus they're underfunded because the two factories that they're going to be pulling the players from and getting the funding from are both small factories that don't get much state funding. Another big factor involved with how Seoul is structured as a club and being part of Motor is Motor themselves weren't exactly popular or well funded. Like I said, because they usually came from smallish factories and smallish places like Altenburg and Weimar that weren't really reporting to the state, that meant they were never going to do well. So you take the fact that it's a small sports club that the state don't really care about, and then add on top Seoul as a place itself, it was never going to go well for Old Motor. Also, all the motor clubs were Betriebssportgemeinschafts, the company sports clubs, which means they were not elite football clubs. They had other sports departments to worry about, and that as such they were also underfunded. There was no sort of backing from the state as such. They had to get funding from the factories they belonged to. So being structured as a motor club and a Betriebssportgemeinschaft were also working against Seoul because they were fully amateur, and by that point in the mid-80s, East German football was slowly becoming, especially with clubs like Magdeburg and Lokomotiv Leipzig and BSG Dynamo and Dynamo Dresden, football was becoming more and more professional. It was becoming more and more like the West by that point, which meant a club like Motor Suhl that was sort of stuck in the 50s were never going to have a fighting chance at doing anything in the league. You know, they might have had a fighting chance, but they were never going to really have a fighting chance, if you see what I mean. So those are the two major factors as to why the club did so badly: where they're from and their location, and being part of the motor sports club and being one of the sort of more underfunded and out the way clubs within the motor sports club. We're now going to move on to the main part of the story, the ill-fated Oberliga season. We've now got to the bit of the video I know you've all been waiting for, because we all love a bit of tragedy. It is the DDR Oberliga 84-85 season, the ill-fated season where it all went wrong for Motor Suhl. But first of all, how did they get to the DDR Oberliga? Well, that's what I'm about to explain. So in the 83-84 season, they finished in a playoff spot in the DDR Liga Staffel B, which is the southern division of East Germany's second flight. As such, they play the teams that came in the playoff spots in the Staffel A, which is the northern division of the DDR Liga. So I'm not going to explain the full system because it is very convoluted and confusing and we'd be here for hours. But anyway, in the game that would decide their Oberliga status, if they'd get up into the Oberliga or whether they'd be staying in the DDR Liga, they faced Chemie Skopau Buna from the Bezirk Halle attached to the Buna Chemical Works. Well, they beat them. Amazing. There we go. Seoul, there's parties in the streets of Seoul. They have reached the DDR Oberliga for the first time in their history. This club from a regional backwater that nobody cares about has reached the DDR Oberliga. It's amazing. Now, what I can tell you is the players were welcomed back with thunderous applause. They all got special thank yous from the local party. The mayor was there. It was very prestigious. They were in the Oberliga. It was amazing for them, considering, that getting to the playoffs is considered a massive achievement. They've finally reached the top table of East German football and they'll be dining with the greats like BSG Dynamo, and everybody was really, really excited. Now, as you can see here, the squad are pictured with the Seoul Neustadt, the Seoul New City in the background. It was absolutely massive. So this picture was taken right before the ill-fated season began. So I thought I'd give you a bit of background as to how they got to the DDR Oberliga. We're now going to move on to talking about some of the results and how the dream and how all the happiness of the playoffs and that playoff win soon dissipated as soon as they got to the DDR Oberliga, and the false start and the false hope. Let's move on to that. This is the Motor Suhl squad right before their first ever DDR Oberliga game, and the fixture list hadn't been kind to them. They would start off their season with a tough game against East German football and royalty big boys Wismut Aue, who are also one of the oldest clubs in the country. But this proved to be a bit of a false dawn. Motor Suhl went into the game probably high on the feelings of the playoffs. Ironically, at their Aue Stadion, that's what the Motor Suhl Stadium was called, playing Wismut Aue, and won 3-1. I think it would have been amazing to be a Motor Suhl fan in the stadium that day. They won 3-1, there was a sellout crowd, everybody was there, even the mayor and the local party leadership were there, and they beat Wismut Aue 3-1. What an absolutely amazing result that must have been. The players must have been euphoric. So they started off their DDR Oberliga season confident. Maybe they're thinking, you know what, we might defy expectations. Well, the expectations weren't going to be defied. They were going to be met and exceeded in a lot of ways. So after that confident win, Motor Suhl then began to slide. And this proved to be their only win all season. Yep. You heard me right, their only win all season. Let's move on to talking about the rest of the season after the false dawn. After the euphoria, the happiness and the shock of the Wismut Aue win, it all unravelled pretty quickly and went downhill pretty badly for poor old Motor Suhl. So after that Aue win, that was it, done. They could not win a game all season after that, and soon the results became pretty bad and pretty embarrassing. The worst probably being an 8-0 home thrashing at the hands of league title holders BSG Dynamo. That was probably the worst, and most of the games that Motor Suhl lost were by 2 goals or more. Against the bigger clubs like Lokomotiv Leipzig and Dynamo Dresden, they were getting beat by very, very bad scoring, 7-1s, 5-0s, 6-0s. It just was not going well for Motor Suhl. And then another big problem for them was they just could not beat teams around them. Try as they might, they could just not beat teams around them. Teams that they were expected to beat, like Chemie Leipzig, Stahl Brandenburg, Stahl Riesa, they couldn't register wins against them. It was either draws or losses. Now, Suhl were really showing up to be an amateur club. They just could not cope with the distances. They were getting absolutely overrun by superior players. Their players were getting tired because they had shifts to work in the factories. Their training facilities weren't up to standard. The training was too much for the players. They weren't used to training at Oberliga level. And that meant even against teams they were expected to beat and they were expected to at least challenge, like Chemie Leipzig or Still Riser or Still Brandenburg, they just could not beat these teams. And even if they did score a few goals, their defensive frailties meant they chuck away leads. And in the end, Motor Suhl ended up 12 points adrift at the bottom of the table and 15 points adrift of safety, which is really, really bad. And it just all quickly went downhill for Suhl. They slid down the table and spent most of the season in the bottom spot. I think there was a few games where, because of other results early on, they weren't bottom, but nearly the whole season they spent in bottom spot, continuously getting absolutely thrashed. Now, we'll look at the stats later, but they conceded a total of 92 goals that ill-fated season, and try as they might, they just could not get results. They got battered off the park by most teams and they just could not cope. Now, like I was saying, the distances involved, the training involved, the players couldn't cope with it because they're amateur players. They have shifts at the factories, they have families to look after. They just couldn't cope with it at all. And when they got to away games especially, they just could not cope. Now, here's the worst stat of it all. And this is shocking. I'm sure this is probably some sort of record. And that season, Seoul lost all their away games. They lost all 13 away games they had. That is absolutely shocking. And they conceded 57 of those 92 goals on the road as well. That is shockingly bad away form. And that is what was their worst. Now, that is probably because when they came to these away games, the players were tired. By the point in the season where they had a large volume of away games, they were just not motivated. They realised they were going to get battered off the park most games. Now, from what I can see, the players did believe, the manager tried to talk them up, but they just couldn't cope. And that was the main issue. They were a small amateur club from the middle of nowhere in East Germany. They were never going to cope well, and that was that. But that is shocking. 57 goals conceded on the road, and they lost all 13 away games. They only managed one home win, 3 home draws, and 9 home losses. It just wasn't great at all. Motor Suhl were not coping, and that is the main thing. They just could not cope at all, and they slumped to the bottom of the table. Now, if there had been more games, if the DDR Oberliga had more games, and you look at the form that Motor Suhl went on, they could very well be worse than SV Tasmania or Derby County. Now, if you think about that Derby County season and times that by a couple of more games, if Motor Suhl and the DDR Oberliga had more games, then you're looking at a pretty embarrassing time of it. Motor Suhl would have been the worst club ever in European football history. So that season was it for Motor Suhl. I don't think they probably ever wanted to see the DDR Oberliga again after that. But there you go, 13 away losses. They lost all 13 of their away games, only managed 1 win all season, which is a 3-1 win over Aue. Now, interestingly, in the reverse against Aue only managed a 2-0 win, which was the last game of the season, and Seoul went there already relegated, not trying, and Aue managed a 2-0 win, which actually wasn't helping Aue at all, because it didn't help their goal difference. If they'd won by even more, if they managed a cricket score like every other team had, Aue could have got European football. But no, Motor Suhl put up that last defiant effort and prevented Aue getting European football. But yeah, it was just a sorry mess of a season where the players couldn't cope, their attack wasn't good enough, the defence wasn't good enough, and overall they got shown up for what they really were. And this really had an effect on Seoul, because when they went to the DDR Liga, when they got relegated, they nearly had a double relegation, nearly got relegated to the Bezirksliga, the 3rd division, after that. So that was the main part of our story, the ill-fated DDR Oberliga season where they lost 13 away games. We're now going to move on to looking at some of the stats involved in that season. I'll get them up and talk further through what that meant. So we'll move on to the stats now. So there are the stats, plain for you to see. And a little reminder, 1 win, of course, against Vismut Aue, 3 draws, and 22 losses, 13 of which were on the road, which were all 13 away games, and a minus 67 goal difference. Scored 16, conceded 92, 57 of those 92 were conceded away from home. Those are some pretty, that makes bad reading, and especially the away form. Now, what do those stats mean? Those stats mean Motor Suhl aren't just the worst Oberliga team ever. They're the second worst team in the history of German league football. Now, it doesn't count the national championship or whatever, and you take it as the Bundesliga and the Oberliga. Motor Suhl are the second worst ever. Second only to that Tasmania team. Now, I'm going to put this into perspective. If the Oberliga had played the same amount of games as the Bundesliga, Motor Suhl would have been worse than Tasmania. Now, I'm sure a lot of you saw Tasmania in the news and on Copa 90 and that. Think about how bad their season was. If Motor Suhl had played the same amount of games as a Bundesliga team, Motor Suhl would have been worse. Now, I know you think that wouldn't have been possible, but I think we've proved today that that is. So there you go. That's Motor Suhl. Plain to see. Plain to see. They are one of the worst sides in German football ever, and probably one of the worst in Europe. I know because the Oberliga didn't have many games, they're maybe not quite up there with some of the sides in La Liga or Liga or the Premier League, but I keep saying if they played more games, they would have been up there with Derby and Tasmania. They could have even been worse than Derby, which again put that into perspective for you. They could have been worse than that Derby County team. So that's what you've sort of got to look at when you look at the stats and consider that Motor Suhl were lucky that the DDR Oberliga was a small league. So there are the stats. That's as simple as that. They are one of the worst teams in not just DDR football in history, but German football in history as a whole. Now, that means they don't just come bottom of the 84-85 Oberliga, no, they come bottom of the eternal Oberliga table. Now, the eternal Oberliga table, you can see it on Wikipedia and other sites. It's on the Deutsche Fußballverband website, which is a sort of homage to the East German Football Association. You can see it there as well. Karlsruhe come top, Motor Suhl come bottom. So that's basically where they collated all the data of every team that ever played in the DDR Oberliga and made an eternal table. And Motor Suhl firmly come bottom in that, because they did even worse. Now, there was some horrifically bad Oberliga teams. Chemie Skopau, Buna, loads of teams like that. Wismut Gera didn't do too well the season. They went down, but they don't even come close to how badly Motor Suhl did. So those are the stats, bottom of the eternal DDR Oberliga table, and like you can see, 1 win, 3 draws, 22 losses, and a goal difference of minus 76. That's just mind-boggling, to be honest. So there you go. Those are the stats. That was the story of the ill-fated Oberliga season. I'm now going to move on to talk about the legacy of Motor Suhl and where they are these days. So what legacy does Motor Suhl have? The short answer is they don't have a legacy. It's as simple as that. Even though they're the worst DDR Oberliga team ever and have come bottom of the eternal DDR Oberliga table, they don't have a legacy. You know, Tasmania have a legacy because there's documentaries made about them. They're very high profile. They play in the 5th division, which in the grand scheme of things is quite good for a club of their size, about to get promoted to Regionalliga Nord. So Tasmania have a legacy, plus loads of people make documentaries about them. Copa 90, who are the royalty of football documentaries, made a documentary about Tasmania. The BBC were on it and everything like that. So Tasmania have a legacy. Tasmania have a following. Motor Suhl don't have that legacy. There's no documentaries about Motor Suhl apart from this little one I've made today. So why is this? Well, between that season and the Wende, the reunification, Motor Suhl were just a firmly mid-table DDR Liga side. They never troubled the playoffs or promotion again and nearly got relegated, as I was saying, to the Bezirksliga because of the impact of what the Oberliga did to them. It upset them so badly that they nearly got relegated again to the Bezirksliga. But they played their time in the DDR Liga, and then when the reunification came, Motor Suhl went bust, and they refounded as Erster Suhler SV 06. So Suhler SV is a homage to a pre-war club of a similar name, and they now find themselves, as far as I know, it's very hard to find information when you get this down low the leagues, they now play in the Kreis Oberliga. For those of you that are not familiar with the lower reaches of the German football pyramid, the Kreis Oberliga is the 12th, makes up the 12th and the 11th division. So basically, it's more or less Sunday League. They are firmly amateur Sunday League football in the local area. It's literally teams from the next village they play. So, you know, Tasmania, whilst they're about to get promoted to the Regionalliga Nordost, the 4th division, which is semi-professional, Suhler SV, which is basically Motor Suhl now, play amateur football in a tiny stadium. The Auer Stadion got massively capacity reduced and looks nothing like it did in the Oberliga days. In a tiny stadium where a few locals and that are probably old enough to remember the Oberliga season probably go and watch the team, and that's it. Now, if you go to Seoul itself, I think you'd probably talk about the team, but outside of Seoul and probably outside of Germany, it's a team nobody's heard of, it's a place nobody's heard of, it's a forgotten corner of Germany, like I was saying. So Seoul do not have a legacy, and like I said, Seouler SV now play amateur football in the very lowest reaches of the German football pyramid, effectively Sunday League. And that's it. It's a sorry end to the sorry tale of the worst DDR Oberliga team ever. There's no documentaries, like I was saying. There's no getting to the heady heights of the 4th Division. Nope. There's no big support base. There's no cult following. Nope. It's 11th or 12th, I don't know which Christ Oberliga they're in. It's 11th or 12th Division football in the local area, and they probably get about 30 or 40 people at a game that will probably be old enough, like I was saying, to remember that ill-fated Oberliga season. So that is Seoul's legacy. It's nothing, unfortunately. Poor old Seoul. I think it would be great if we all got some money together and went and visited them at some point. I'm definitely going to visit them, just for the hell of it. Visit the worst DDR Oberliga team ever. So there we go. That is the rather sorry tale of Motor Suhl. I'm now going to cut to the outro. And there we have it. The sorry tale of BSG Motor Suhl, the DDR Oberliga's worst team. I really hope you enjoyed this video, guys. When I did a bit of research in East German football for the Oberliga guide, I looked at Motor Suhl and their season, and I thought, you know what? It's a video I've got to do at some point. Everybody's talking about Tasmania Berlin, the worst Bundesliga team ever. How's about we talk about the worst Oberliga team ever? And I felt Suhl's story needed to be told, because I've talked a lot about East German football, and it was a story that needed to be covered. It was a story I was always going to cover at some point, because it's one of those ones that's unique to East German football. You know, an amateur club from the middle of nowhere that nobody cares about getting to the Oberliga and then getting absolutely trounced out of it. That, you know, it's unique to East German football. You know, Tasmania at least got 2 wins. And I think, you know, Tasmania got done to death. It was a video I was considering doing about Tasmania. You know, after the interview, I thought I'd do a follow-up video, but I thought Tasmania should have been done to death. I want to do Motor Suhl. I feel this story deserves to be told, because they are important to East German football history. You know, without the losers, you wouldn't have winners. You know, I could easily talk about BFC Dynamo, which I will at some point, but we've got to talk about Motor Suhl. You talk about the most successful club, you've got to talk about the worst club. You know, you can't have winners without having losers as well. So I think Motor Suhl deserved to have their story told, and I think I owe it to the people of Seoul and the Seouler SV fans and the players these days that their team's story gets shared, because Seoul isn't a talked about city. You know, like I was saying repeatedly in this video, it's a very forgotten corner of Germany, and I just wanted to share that little bit of a story. And maybe, you know, the groundhoppers amongst you that watch my videos, it might be a place you want to go now. You can see the DDR Oberliga's worst ever team. So yeah, that was that. You know, I just thought it was a story that needed to be shared. I hope you found this video interesting, guys. I certainly enjoyed making this one. I'm sorry it's not too graphically exciting this time, but it is hard to find photos for such obscure things. I had to search for ages to find Seouler SV these days. It was really hard. I need to go on the club website to find a decent picture, and most of the pictures are from the olden days. The pictures I found of them in the Oberliga days are from the Bundes archive and the local newspaper, so credit to them. Obviously no copyright intended or anything like that, I have to say that. But yeah, that's the story of Motor Suhl, the DDR Oberliga's worst ever team, the rather sorry tale of Motor Suhl. I really hope you enjoyed it, like I was saying, guys. As always, thank you for your amazing support. If you enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like to show your appreciation. Get involved in the discussion. What did you think of Motor Suhl, and what do you think of their rather sorry story? And yep, if you're new to the channel, please click that subscribe button for unique Hibs, East German football and German football content. I will see you all in a while. Jack out.